Good morning to all of you. I think we can start as it is 12:30 by now, at least where I'm sitting in Brussels. So welcome to all of you and thank you for joining our session on measuring carbon footprint. My name is Marion Leboulch and I'm working at FEBEA, the European Federation of Ethical and Alternative Banks and Financiers. I will have the pleasure to moderate this session next to our two esteemed speakers, Alessandro Galli from the Haute Orcool Institute and Leo Miranda from l'ANEF, the French Ethical Bank. Regarding our session, I would propose that we listen first to our speaker's presentation, and then we will have time for questions and further discussion among ourselves. I would like to start first with a short introduction at my hand to give a bit of context to our today's session. So thanks first of all to the Microfinance Center for organizing this session and for welcoming us. As we know, social and inclusive finance intermediaries play a crucial role in fostering a fair and sustainable economy and society. And social finance intermediaries give access to financing to very small and medium businesses and low-income individuals. Social finance intermediaries especially provide finance to those who don't have access to the mainstream bank and financiers, for which, profit comes first. So doing so, they have a key role, I would say, in the social economy sector and in contributing to a fair society. However, as we all know, our world is facing environmental challenges such as climate change, resource depletion, biodiversity loss. And so it is essential for the social finance intermediaries to evaluate their impact beyond the financial aspects and metrics, because incorporating environmental metrics is equally vital. Measuring environmental impacts, such as carbon footprint, is key to minimize, negative impact on the ecosystem and to help instead, of generating a positive impact on the society. I would say that by doing so, social finance can contribute to a more sustainable and resilient future while uplifting the lives of their clients, of their beneficiaries. As we are going to see during our sessions with our two speakers, I would like to introduce you first to Mr. Alessandro Galli. He is representing today the Haute Orcool Institute and is a research director within the institute. Alessandro is a macroecologist and sustainability scientist with a passion for anthropology and human behavior. His research focused mainly on the overall human metabolism and how it squares with the planet's limits, especially in key societal factors such as food, tourism, and education. His main ambition is to contribute and support evidence-based decision-making processes via sustainability indicators and environmental accounting tools. His aim is to help to address the global challenge of collaborating to live well within the limits of our planet. Alessandro, in his presentation, is going to give us information about what measuring carbon footprint is, how to measure emission can lead us to approach to reduce those emissions, and finally see with us whether measuring carbon footprint is just a mere exercise or a tool to really create positive impact. Then this presentation will be followed by the presentation from Leo Miranda. Leo is a marketing director at the French ethical bank l'ANEF, based in Lyon. Leo is eager to work for a more human economy and convinced that finance is a considerable lever for responding to the climate and social challenges of our time. As such, he embarked on his carbon footprint measurement process, and even going for l'ANEF, and even going beyond just, measuring carbon footprint by helping l'ANEF to develop its own complementary indicators in different fields, such as the ecology field, the social and cultural fields. Leo will offer us an insight on how l'ANEF, as an ethical bank, is measuring its carbon footprint, making sense of it, and also going beyond it, acting for a more fair and more sustainable society. So let's start with a presentation from Leo. And so from Alessandro, and Alessandro, the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you so much, Marion. And I'm going to share my screen. Thanks again for the invitation. Before I start to dig deeper into like what does it mean to measure carbon footprint and an attempt to bring a little bit of clarity on this, I would like to ask you all a very quick question. And so there is a poll that we can quickly launch just to understand how familiar are you with carbon footprint. So here you can just select one of the information if you are very familiar and have used it. If you are somehow familiar, if you have just heard about it, or if you have never heard before. So this is just a quick ice breaking, and also to let me understand like how familiar you are with this concept. There is one attendee that is very familiar, one that has never heard before, and then somehow familiar most of the people, but never applied it. Okay, I think I can move on. I mean, it's not really like we don't need to get all answers. So I would like to quickly introduce like the concept of carbon footprint. But before doing this, I need to say that the term footprint has really become very popular in our society and is generally interpreted as a sort of like synonymous of human impact on the planet. And there are many different footprint indicators, actually. Here you see on the left on this slide, there are nitrogen footprint, chemical footprint, land footprint, water footprint, carbon footprint, so many different indicators. All these different indicators are basically trying to capture a different side of the environmental impact that human activities cause on the planet. When we speak about carbon footprint, more specifically, we refer to the climate impact that a product, an activities, an individual plays on the environment. And this is actually determined by the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that such a product, activity, or individual cause and release on the environment. Now, the beauty of footprint indicators, of all footprint indicators, and therefore also of the carbon footprint, is that they really have a very wide range of applicability. They can be applied from a very small scale, as you see on the right side, so to products, to organizations, to individual people, but they can also be applied all the way up to a very large scale, so country level, global level, and so on. The type of methodology that can be used to assess the carbon footprint change depending on the scale that we are looking at. So we can go from more LCA-based methods, so life cycle assessment, to more method based on input-output tables, so more economic side. The actual calculation, I would say, is relatively easy. I would say it's just a series of multiplications and additions. So if we want to look at the carbon footprint of a product, for instance, this is just a multiplication of the amount of the product that is produced or consumed and the carbon intensity of that production. So how many, for instance, kilograms of CO2 equivalent are emitted in order to produce 1 unit of that product. So that product could be beef, for instance. And then when we consider activities that involve the use of many different products, is just the sum of these individual carbon footprint that give us the aggregate values. So the mathematics is really very simple, but what is at the core of the calculation is what type of flows do we need to include in this calculation. So what is exactly that we need to include? And I'm going to make a quick example here to help you understand better this. So let's assume we take as an example an hamburger, and we want to see what is the carbon footprint, the climate impact of producing this hamburger. In order to do this, we need to start like understanding what is the value chain of this product. So we start to look at what the hamburger consists of. So in a nutshell, like to simplify, beef on one side and the paper like that is used to wrap the hamburger. And so here there are emissions at these two stages that can be calculated. But we can also go one level down and for each one of these products, understand what is within the supply chain, the value chain of the product themselves. So for beef, we can look at the feed that has been used to raise the animals, at the water that has been provided to the animal, and so on and so on. At every stage, we can calculate what are the emissions associated with this stage. So the question really becomes where to stop in these, let's say, going backwards on the supply chain. So when it comes to the application of the carbon footprint to a company or, let's say, a financial institution, then the definition of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions come to help us define what are, let's say, the boundaries of our study. We can refer to scope 1 emissions when we look at the emissions that are directly owned by the company. This means the emissions that are caused by the use of fossil fuels in the vehicles that are owned by the company, the use of electricity, lights, and machineries within the buildings of the company themselves. So all of these fit under scope 1. But the electricity that is used inside the company is not produced often in the company. So it's produced far away and is imported, no? Or like purchased by the company. So at the place of productions of this electricity, there are emissions. So these indirect emissions that come from the production of the electricity that the company uses are defined as scope 2 emissions. So you, in assessing a company footprint, you can like go from scope 1 to scope 2, but you can also extend these further and go all the way upstream in the value chain of the company. So looking at all the different set of materials, resources that are used, purchased by the company, the travel of the employees, and so on. So all these indirect company emissions that are associated with the activities of the company but are not owned or controlled by the company fit under the scope 3. So while we have focused on what happened upstream till now, one key question to ask is also what happens downstream, what impact the activities of a company, or in your case, the activities of a company that you may end up or deciding to finance cause in society. And these look, let's say, downstream of what are the implications that can also be like carbon footprint implications of financed activities are sometimes referred to as financed emissions. And Leo from LANEF will focus more on these in his presentation later on. So now I would like to step back a little bit and provide a more wider context of the carbon footprint situation in which we are in as a society. Now, at the Otto Kuhl Institute, we run carbon footprint calculation, not for products or company, but let's say for countries and for individuals. This is a very complex schema, but it's just to let you know and communicate the fact that really the boundaries of our assessment are slightly different from the scope 1, 2, and 3 that we have seen before, and really trying to capture all the emissions that are associated with the final consumption activities of individuals during their daily life within a country. Now, before I reveal some of the results of our assessment, is also quite important to understand that we do have a benchmark for this. So the Paris Agreement has agreed to limit the increase in the temperature of the planet to 1.5 degrees maximum, no? Before compared to pre-industrial levels. So these target can be converted into a per capita quota. So if we assume and with these targets and we take the amount of emissions that are left to be emitted on the planet in order to respect this target, then we can calculate what would be, should be the per capita footprint of each individual on the planet by 2030, so around 2.5 tons per person per year, and by 2050, only 0.7 tons. So are these enough? Are these a lot or not? Well, let's see what are the results from a few countries that we have investigated a couple of years ago. So here you see that actually like a few key information can be extracted, can be seen from this. First of all, that there is a huge inequality in the amount of emissions that are being released because of the daily and the lifestyle activities of individuals, of residents of countries around the world. In the global north, in the high-income countries, we see very high level of carbon emissions, carbon footprint. So in the case of Canada, for instance, about 13 tons per person. So 6 times what the equally shared quota should be. But at the same time, also countries like India and Indonesia, where this amount is way smaller. Together with this high inequality, we also see that activities like food and transportation do play a major role, next also to housing, on determining the carbon footprint of residents of the various countries. And of course, like different lifestyle activities play a different role depending on the country that we look at. So this starts to depict a situation in which we see a much higher consumption of resources and a much higher release of carbon emissions than what would be acceptable to limit the warming of the planet, and an inequality in this. So starting from this value, we investigated what are the type of interventions that can be made in each of these areas in order to help reduce, in order to help countries reduce their footprint. And here, I don't want to go in the details of all these different options, but just to show you that there are options that are available and that will just need to be scaled up globally on the transportation side, on nutrition, consumer good, housing, leisure services, and so on. Now, let me take the example of one of these solutions. And here I'm shifting specifically to an example of mobility in Finland. This is just to say that in our identification of the solutions, we have tried to cluster the type of interventions that can be done around 3 main areas. So the avoid, the shift, and the improve clusters. And I like to read these upwards. So improve, what does it mean? That in the mobility sector, for instance, emissions can be reduced by shifting to more efficient vehicles that allow us to travel the same amount of kilometers by emitting less CO2. And this is like, for instance, it could be realized through investing in electric vehicles, for instance. But this first cluster of this improved modality is then followed by the shift modality, where actually improvement and reductions are much higher, and they are achieved not by increasing the efficiency but rather by shifting from the use of car to the use of public transportation system, for instance. So this is another type of investment that you can make to have an even additional impact on the mobility sector in this case. And finally, we have the avoid cluster of intervention. In this case, it is, for instance, the restructuring, the reorganizing of the urban spaces in which we live in order to ensure that goods and services are accessible to people within walking distance, and therefore we cut or we reduce from the start emissions by reducing the need to travel around. What is important to note is that if we take all the clusters of improve, shift, or avoid solutions that we have identified, none of these scenarios alone is able to, this is the case of Finland, to help the country reduce its carbon footprint by 2035 to stay within the limit of 1.5 degree or even 2 degree increase in the temperature, but is rather a combination, this black line, of the three interventions together that is necessary to help reduce the carbon footprint of the country and, let's say, go back within the limit that we have set of 1.5 targets. We have also, and this is quite an interesting information to look at, we have run some citizen labs in countries around Europe to understand not only the impact of these solutions, but also their acceptability, let's say, by people. And unfortunately, let me say unfortunately, what we see is that the solutions that will have the highest capacity to reduce carbon emissions that we see here on the top side of the quadrant of the graph are also those that have the lowest acceptance rate by people, adoption rate. And vice versa, those that have the highest acceptance rate have the lowest carbon footprint reduction potential. And so this leads me to the conclusion of this short intervention. I have two more slides and 2 points very quickly to make. The first one is that we really like to focus on this idea of lifestyle because in our view, the lifestyle, the set of decisions that we end up taking every day to satisfy our needs and wants as individuals is actually a matter of three different factors. It's not only determined by our preferences as individuals, but is also determined by what are the, let's say, community aspirations, what are the social norms of the context within which we live, which in turn is also shaped by all the political, technological, economic structures and infrastructures within which we live. This is very important to note because it's important to understand that sometimes it's much easier to intervene and, for instance, with your financing decision to influence what could be the actions of individuals, but these have a very limited impact on carbon reduction, while you may have a much bigger leverage point and capacity to really trigger a change in society by intervening on the systemic structure of our societies, and also by reshaping what are the aspirations of people, so that, let's say, the more impactful solutions also become the ones that are more acceptable. So to close, the implications for banks and like non-banking financial institutions is that you can, of course, use carbon footprint at different levels. You can use carbon footprint assessment to understand your internal operations and make it more efficient, to increase the awareness of your employees and therefore, let's say, extend your reach. But it's really when you start to intervene for optimizing the provisioning system or really to create new systems and new aspiration in society that you make the biggest impact. And thank you so much. That's it from my side.
Thanks a lot, Alessandro, for this very insightful presentation. We shall have question in the end, but as it is a very concrete one, Alessandro, there is a question mentioning whether USA was on your Gantt chart, you know, with a different emission per capita.
Yes, so USA was not in there. That is like on the report that we released a couple of years ago, we only have like the 10 countries. that we showed. So the top of that chart was Canada, but you would expect to find the US somewhere very close to Canada, perhaps even higher. We are now working on a new edition of the report that will be released in spring next year. And over there, we will be expanding the list of countries to about 35 countries. So US will be in there.
Okay, okay. Thanks a lot, Alessandro. So then I will give the floor to Leo Miranda, who is going to present us how l'ANEF in France is measuring its carbon footprint, as I mentioned before, how they are going beyond just measuring carbon footprints. Leo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you, Alessandro, to give us the whole picture on how to be interested on the topic of carbon footprint. I will be a little bit more. I will go a little bit more deeper in an explanation on how a bank, a financial institution, and especially an ethical bank, can use carbon footprint measurement in its reports, and why it's important to go further carbon footprint, and that would be the end of my presentation. The main question you might be asking is why a financial institution could be interested in measuring its impact, and especially carbon footprint. And we have three main reasons that leads us to do that job in the past years, since 2022, more or less. The first thing is l'ANEF is the main ethical bank in France, and for decades we were the only one practicing this kind of activity. But we didn't have to prove anything because our action were considered as virtuous by themselves, and we didn't have to do something really specific on that topic. But progressively, we had the invitation to measure more our impact. So NGOs, medias, our member and clients, and also a partner ask us to be more objective on our claims, because it wasn't sufficient to say, okay, we finance only organizations that have a very good mindset regarding ecologic or social impact. It's important to have numbers to clearly measure what kind of impact we have as an ethical bank. And more recently, we have a movement in especially in Europe with taxonomy and CSRD that are which are regulation that encourage organization to measure carbon footprint, not only carbon footprint, but all the different organizations have to do that, will have to do that in the future. And we choose especially carbon footprint, and Alessandro talk about that, because it's an indicator which is today known, understood by the public, and there is a lot of medias and journalists that use this indicator. So that's the reason why we choose this specific indicator to start. But we knew from the beginning that we had to have other measurements to embrace all our activity. this scheme is just to remember that there are three different types. Alessandro talked about that before, and for an ethical institute, for a financial institution, it would be quite the same. We will focus on the activity of the company, which is in the center, the scope 1 and 2, and then you have two types of scope 3, which are upstream and downstream for the supplier, for the clients. And we are just to remember that for a financial institution, even if there are a lot of different things that change in comparison to a regular company, we stay in this approach of the different scopes, and we will see later how we manage this different scope to measure our carbon footprint. The first thing, which is very important and very different, maybe in comparison to other type of company, is in financial activity, we will focus in priority on the scope 3. Because while analyzing scope 1 and 2 is necessary to lead by example, it's really secondary in numbers compared to our scope 3, where the majority of emissions are found. Why is that? Because the scope 3 is what we do with the money we have. So it's all the financial activity that the bank has, for example, making loans or investing in different company. We will take a part of that of those emissions, and that's where we can find the most impact and carbon footprint impact, whether with the scope 1 and 2 you only have the employees, I don't know, the car of the company, but it's not relevant. It's not too relevant to measure the carbon footprint. So for a financial institution, it's better to focus on the scope 3. And the carbon footprint of the borrower are attributed to the bank according to a really simple formula, which is the last one on the presentation. We will take the loan amount, we will measure the carbon footprint of the company, and we will make this formula to have a proportion of the carbon footprint linked to the loan we did. So we will not take all the carbon footprint of the company if we only make a loan which represents 20% of the total value of the company. We will make a proportion of that, but the formula stay quite simple to analyze the scope 3 of our institution. If we see the balance sheet, which is the balance sheet of LANEF for 2022 and not 2023, you can see what I was talking about. You will see at the right part of the scheme the calculation of induced emission. So the calculation are doing on the loans to the borrower, who are mainly companies, a little bit of a private person, but mainly there are companies. Then all the savings we have as a bank, because we need to let a part of our money to other financial institution, and then the rest is investment of the French states, or investment in some companies sometime. And we will have a calculation of our induced emission. And then what is really important to link two parts, we will allocate this emission to our to the savers, to the clients of the bank, to say, okay, with €1 in LANEF or with €1 million, you have 121 ton of equivalent CO2 produce, because it's what the client ask. When I save my money in LANEF, what is the impact in carbon? And that's the reason why we do this calculation between the two parts of the balance sheet. To measure the carbon footprint of LANEF, we conduct the first carbon assessment in 2021, based on our data, 2020 data, and we choose a data provider, which name is Carbon 4, to ensure methodologically equality when comparing with other institutions. That was the main reason we choose this data provider, was because he had the same methodology to measure the main bank's scope 3, and we had the opportunity to compare ourselves to each other in proportion, because it's important to be in proportion of our size. This year, we are updating our data, because the data comes from 2020, and we want to updating the data, and we increase significantly our balance sheet from 500 million to 800 million euros. So it's quite different in comparison to the past. Furthermore, we are now better able to calculate the carbon intensity of our borrower. We are increasingly measuring it themselves. When we start measuring in 2021, there was less than 10% of our borrowers that were measuring actually their carbon footprint. So we had to use a lot of statistical measurements from the NACE code and the size of the company, and now we can see that maybe 20% of our borrowers are measuring directly their carbon footprint. So it helps a lot to be more precise in our measurements. So using a provider helps, but it's also possible to measure impact in-house, especially using open data. There are different websites. One is Open Carbon Watch. I can share you if you are interesting the link that gives you all the. It's an aggregate of all the impact, the carbon impact measurements of the main company, the companies that are doing their impact measurements, and it also gives you an indication with the size and the NACE code, for example, of what could be the carbon impact of a company, and it's in open data, so you can do it in house. It's harder than having a partnership with a data provider, but yeah, I think today it could be possible, and in the future I think we will go to this kind of methodology, because it's quite equivalent, even if it takes more time. Reduced emission and avoided emission, it's a concept that is for me really interesting, even if it's not clearly accepted by the whole scientific community. The reduced emission is when you are seeing at the left of the slide an emission induced emission, and you are reducing the emission because they make efforts to reduce their its carbon impact. And the voided emission, it's another concept which measures the contribution of an activity to energy transition. For example, I take an example, it's better to understand. If you are constructing a train station, you will measure emission linked to the construction. So it doesn't give you how the use of the train will change in the whole society, the use of fossil energy. And that the emission avoided emission helps you to measure. If you are financing a train station, the avoided emission will give you how it will help to reduce the sensibility on fossil energy. And that's why it's something that we are measuring also. You can't make a subtraction between the two data. It's clearly two data that you have to maintain together. You can't make a subtraction between the two, but it gives you a better understanding of what, as a financial institution, what you are doing, and if it's going to the right way regarding the carbon emission. Last thing on the methodology, which is really important, is a double counting, because to aggregate carbon footprint within a financing portfolio, it's necessary to address that double counting, because measuring the carbon footprint with a credit portfolio leads to double counting, since an enterprise's scope 3 is include other enterprises scope 1 and 2. So it's important to have a formula to divide the emission. Carbon 4 choose to divide the emission by 3 to avoid the double counting phenomenon. They give us an explanation on that number. And the thing that is really important is they did this calculation, this division, with all the French financial institutions. And when we are comparing the same thing. Clearly, I admit that I don't know. If they say, okay, you have to divide by 3 or 2, I don't know. But it's important to be aware of this thing. When you are a financial institution, you will finance emissions that already have been produced and that already have been calculated in the carbon footprint analysis of all the companies. The result for us, for LANEF in France, is 121 tons of CO2 equivalent emitted per million invested. That is really important because the French bank, for example, BNP, it's really larger than LANEF, 2,000 times larger than LANEF in activity. So it doesn't have a lot of sense to make a calculation of the carbon footprint of BNP comparing to LANEF. But if you do this calculation per million invested, you can do a very good proportion, and you can compare. And that's the scheme just in front of you gives you the intensity in ton per CO2 per million euro invested. So as you can see, we have the very small carbon footprint impacts, and I've set also in the green table the avoided emission intensity, which are really good, minus 97 ton equivalent CO2 equivalent per million euro, and you can see that the two numbers are shown at the same time, but we were not subtracting one by another because it doesn't make sense. But it helps to understand that beyond the emission that are we are financing solutions that will help in the future to change mobility, to change the way we are wearing clothes, the change we are different things that helps the whole society to change, and not only measuring at one instant the carbon footprint. There are limits on the carbon on the carbon measurement limits that we faced. The first thing is carbon is only one of the 9 planetary boundaries, so it is really necessary to make progress on other limitary, for example, biodiversity, water, deforestation, and there are other are not calculated in the carbon footprint because you are focusing on just one indicator, and it's important to go further regarding this planetary boundaries, even if it's harder. And we say that, Alessandro told that, for the CO2, it's easy to understand, and we have a methodology to measure it quite clearly. For the biodiversity, it's really hard to find indicators and to understand how an activity by itself or a company is inducing impacts on the biodiversity or the water, on the deforestation. It's harder, but it's important to go further and not staying just only on one indicator. Then the second limits we face is the primary and secondary sectors emit more than the tertiary sector, and for us, the society needs all three to work. So it's not as a financial institution, we want to keep financing farming, ecological farming, but farming because it's important to eat. And but if you are focusing only on the emission, on the carbon emission, you will end with financing only a publicity agency or I don't know, tertiary sector, and even if you need even if the society needs the tree to work. That's the second limit. Talking about organic farming, sometime in some calculation, it's organic farming emits more than the conventional farming, because for the same carbon unit consumption, the yield can be lower. That's important to have that in mind. So it's not the only data we need to see, to watch when we are financing organic farming, because there are a lot of different ecological helps with organic farming. But regarding the carbon, in some calculation, it's not a good. It's better to do conventional farming. Finally, loans to individual emit less than loans to businesses. Okay, but that's not a reason for a financial institution to finance only individuals. You need to finance companies, the economic development, and that's a limit. If you are a company, a bank that is financing only individual, you will have a better note regarding carbon emission, even if it's a little bit fake, because we need all the three sectors, the primary, the secondary, the tertiary. We need to grant loans to individual and also to businesses. So the question of the social and societal utility of the consumed carbon unit arise here, in my point of view. And that's the reason why we decide to extend the impact measurement and not only stay on the carbon footprint measurement. As you can see, we start to measure different things. First field is ecology field. So production of renewable energy, organic product, recycled waste, etc., etc. So we extend this area with new indicators in complement of the carbon footprint. As I said before, we decide to progressively internalize with our own methodology the carbon footprint, and for the other in the extension, we decide also to do our own methodology. It doesn't work with a data provider, but working directly with the borrower to have a very specific analysis that fits to our activity. And we also, that is really important regarding, in my point of view, microfinance. We also implemented an indicator in the social field of our activity, because job creation, social inclusion, social housing, or women's entrepreneurship are really fields that we are financing a lot, and where the carbon footprint is important, but it's secondary. It's not the first objective of this kind of company, is to give an answer to social problem and not to ecological problem. So we decide to implement also indicators in this field, and also in the cultural field, because LANEF finances these three main areas: ecology, social, and cultural. And we have several indicators to measure our impact and the impact of our financement to the cultural field. Going further in the next years, and I will end with that, we want to expand the ecological impact analysis to include biodiversity, water, and deforestation. We want to extend our activity to the 3,000 and more active loans, because at the moment we are working only on the new production. So in 2023, we analyzed the 500 new loans we did in the last year, but we have also more than 3,000 loans to analyze, and we will going step by step to have a full analysis of our balance sheet, and not only the new production. Internalize the carbon footprint measurements. It's one of our goals. I talked about that before. Set targets. That is really important, to have a policy, internal policy for each indicator, to develop actionable policy. Currently, and we only measure. So if the carbon footprint is really higher in 2024 than it was in 2020, yes, we just face this result, but we doesn't have at the moment targets in every indicator, and that's a way we want to go in the future. And also prepare to CSRD regulation compliance, because there are a lot of different things that I share with you today that are really linked to this CSRD regulation compliance, and step by step we will have to comply with this new regulation, even if we have until 2026 to have a proper CSRD regulation compliance. Just some suggestion to hand up for the microfinance sector. First thing, the CSRD and the taxonomy will require you to measure your impact. So I think you doesn't have the choice. And I suggest that it's good to start as the sooner the better, because you will end up to measure because the different regulation, and especially European regulation, will enforce you to have a proper measurement in the next year. As a microfinance institution, it seems important to first focus on the core of your impact. So think about what is the main impact for a microfinance institution. Is it social? Is it environmental or something else? Is it both? And define indicator related to this core promise first. I doesn't see that it's not important to measure carbon. Carbon, you will have to measure it, but I think it's better to think about what is the main indicators that I need to set up and to watch during the time, and then adding secondary indicators in the future. And when it comes to carbon impact, as you are a financial institution, it's more relevant to focus on scope 3, and you will have time in the next year to make the scope 1 and 2. So the measurement of your life as a company, it's better to do it later and focus more on the scope 3. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Leo, for your presentation and all the concrete recommendation in the end. So we have very little time for questions, so do not hesitate to ask for question in the chat or to raise your hand if you want to ask your question directly to the speakers. Very quickly, as we have few minutes left, I would ask you, Leo, what you could tell us about the impact of measuring carbon footprint regarding your loan policy. Did it impact your loan policy to your clients? And if you can tell us a bit how did it impact it? No.
As I thought before, at the moment we set up all the carbon footprint measurement just to be aware of what were our impact and the impact of our companies, and that one of our goals to set policy regarding different area, for example, for vehicles or for financing vehicles, certain type of class of vehicle. At the moment, we didn't change strictly our credit policy, and that's one of our goals for the carbon and for the rest also.
Thank you for that. What I note from the two of you presentation as well is that measuring carbon footprint is a tool, but that represents also some challenges regarding the activities you are assessing through using this tool, because as you say, it's not always clear if an activity is having an impact on your carbon footprint is the key aspect you shall take into consideration, because maybe as organic farming, in the end, it's more positive for the society than just going beyond the metric of the carbon footprint. And what I think as well, what we could say that it could lead to some additional cost as well, because when you decide to encourage your clients or your internal staff to implement some eco-friendly practices, that may also involve some upfront investments and additional costs. And it is also, I think, something to take into consideration for social finance providers who are willing, to start this journey of measuring the carbon footprint impact. And I think, Leo, as you mentioned as well, and Alessandro too, sometimes a question of trade-off. Because, as I say again, a loan portfolio itself could have a high environmental impact, but maybe it's not always yielding the highest financial return. But in the end, it is what we are looking for. So this is something I think we need to take into consideration. And something that is key as well when you embark on such a journey of measuring carbon footprint, I think it's to encourage behavioral change. And that's a challenge because it means, as you mentioned, the two of you, changes in the behavior, not only regarding your own, but also your beneficiaries, your service suppliers, of a wide range of different stakeholders. And I think, as you mentioned, Leo, it's encouraging to see that some of your beneficiaries are already changing their attitude and measuring themselves, their carbon footprint. So is there any further questions or remarks from the participants? Because unfortunately, the topic is very interesting, but we are already reaching the 1 hour session. Yeah, we have one question from Mudashiru Lamidi. Using the intensity of carbon footprint could help big companies to hide behind efficiency scale, but in reality, it is the absolute value of carbon of GHG emitted that is causing the overshooting of the climate boundaries. What do you think about the wide use of relative value? That will be more a question for Alessandro. And the intensity of the carbon footprint could help big companies to hide behind efficiency, but in reality, it is the absolute value of carbon or GHG emitted that is causing the overshooting of the climate.
Well, I think you will need to measure both, like I think like measuring the intensity, it helps you understand how you perform compared to other, let's say, companies or players that operate within your same sector. So it gives you a sense of how efficient you are in your activities. So it was quite interesting, like when Leo was presenting, like how much carbon is released per, let's say, dollar or euro of investment. So this is something that you can usually use to compare yourself with others. But there is no doubt that if you want to understand what is the overall volume and the total volume of impact that you are causing, then you have to go for the absolute number. Yeah. But this is also what is requested in the ISO norms as well. So you cannot just hide yourself behind efficiencies.
Thank you, Alessandro. Unfortunately, we have to close our session. I think that, we can say that measuring impact for social finance providers by default will involve a holistic approach that would consider a mix of quantitative and qualitative metrics to make sure it's relevant to the activities. A kind of ratio between social, environmental, and economic criteria as well would be required. And as we mentioned before, I think the collaboration of the different wide range of stakeholders inside and outside the financial institution would be key as well to undertake such a journey. What is important is to remember that every social finance loan extended has ripple effects, and so let's make them positive for both the people and the planet, and through implementing part of the methodology that were presented today by our two esteemed speakers. So thanks a lot to Alessandro, and thanks a lot to Leo for your presentations. Thanks to the participants for attending the session. If you would like to further interact with the speakers of today, do not hesitate to get in touch with them. And I would like to wish you a good continuation and attending the upcoming session of the Social Finance Vibe event. Thanks a lot to all of you. Wishing you a nice day.